Good morning, this is Omni View, episode 27 for April 3rd, 2026, Balanced News Perspectives. We'll cover what happened, how different viewpoints frame it, so you can decide for yourself. We begin with a story that carries serious implications for the Middle East and global energy security. The United States and Israel conducted coordinated strikes on Iranian targets overnight, destroying the country's largest bridge in an operation that reportedly killed 8 people and wounded 90 others. President Trump followed the strikes with a public warning to Iran, stating that further action against Iranian infrastructure has not even started, while urging Tehran to come to the negotiating table and make a deal. Iran, for its part, has launched a series of retaliatory actions across the region, including a claimed strike by its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on an Oracle data center in Dubai. Tehran has also sent a formal letter to the United Nations Security Council cautioning against what it describes as provocative actions that could further destabilize the region. The context here is important. Tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States have been building for years, rooted in disputes over Iran's nuclear program, its support for regional proxy groups, and repeated confrontations in the Strait of Hormuz. What makes this latest round different is the direct targeting of major pieces of Iranian infrastructure and the explicit linkage Trump has drawn between military pressure and the need for a diplomatic agreement. Both sides appear to be calculating that the other will eventually blink, but the human and economic costs are mounting. Different perspectives on this are worth noting. The Guardian reports that Trump is pressing Iran toward a deal, framing the American and Israeli actions as necessary responses to Iranian threats to close or disrupt shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. France 24 highlights what it calls a disturbing trend of United States and Israeli strikes hitting non-military targets such as civilian airports, hospitals, universities, and now the tallest bridge, placing particular emphasis on the civilian casualties that have resulted. Al Jazeera presents Iran's view that it is responding to unprovoked aggression, noting that Tehran has launched regional counterattacks while the United States continues to escalate threats against Iranian infrastructure. The Daily Mail notes that while American military performance has been strong and enemy leadership has been decimated, there has been no regime change in Tehran and the mullahs continue fighting on. Both sides agree that a major bridge was destroyed and that Trump has issued public warnings. They differ sharply on whether the strikes primarily target legitimate military capabilities or cross into excessive damage to civilian infrastructure. What is interesting here is how the same events are interpreted through different lenses of security and proportionality. The question worth considering: what constitutes a military versus civilian target in this kind of conflict, and how might further escalation affect shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway that, as we'll discuss later, is vital to the global economy? Shifting now to developments inside the United States administration, where another high-profile personnel change has drawn attention. President Trump has fired Attorney General Pam Bondi, a figure described across coverage as both a loyalist and a tenacious defender of the president during his previous term and current one. Reports indicate that Trump is considering firing additional cabinet members in the coming days. This move comes shortly after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth removed 2 senior Army officers, part of what appears to be a broader pattern of personnel adjustments across the executive branch. The firing has prompted fresh discussion about stability and continuity within the current administration. The background matters. Pam Bondi was seen by supporters as someone who would prioritize the president's agenda and push back against what they viewed as entrenched bureaucratic resistance in the Justice Department. Critics, however, have long questioned whether her close alignment with Trump could compromise the department's independence on sensitive legal matters. This latest change fits into a larger narrative about Trump's management style, one that favors personal loyalty and decisive action, but sometimes creates turbulence in key institutions. Perspectives differ on the significance of the firing. Al Jazeera frames it as the removal of a key Trump loyalist from a critical position at a time when the administration faces multiple legal and policy challenges. The Daily Mail reports that Trump was considering more cabinet firings on Thursday night following Bondi's ouster, suggesting the changes may not be finished. Some coverage connects this to broader tensions within the administration and Trump's well-documented approach to personnel management, while others see it as part of the normal executive prerogative over appointments that every president exercises to some degree. The question worth considering: what does this signal about stability within the current administration? And how might it affect ongoing legal or policy priorities at a moment when international crises are demanding consistent leadership? Meanwhile, the conflict in the Middle East is sending ripples through economies far from the battlefield. Westpac Banking Corporation's chief executive warned that the escalating war involving Iran has raised the risk of a recession in Australia. He pointed to uncertainty about how long supply chain disruptions and higher energy prices could weigh on the Australian economy, which relies heavily on stable global trade routes. This connects to broader concerns about energy security and the vulnerability of key shipping lanes affected by the fighting. Bloomberg presents the warning from leadership of one of Australia's major banks as a sober assessment rather than alarmism. The focus is on economic risks stemming directly from the ongoing regional conflict, particularly potential spikes in oil prices and interruptions in maritime trade. Some analysts see this as a reminder of how interconnected global markets have become. A disruption halfway around the world can quickly affect employment, inflation, and growth in a resource-exporting nation like Australia. Others note that Australia has weathered similar external shocks before through a combination of domestic policy adjustments, currency flexibility, and strong trading relationships in Asia. The question worth considering: how are distant conflicts affecting national economies that may seem geographically removed, and what specific supply chains are most vulnerable in the current environment? European officials are also sounding alarms about the potential long-term consequences. Brussels has warned that Europe must prepare for a long-lasting energy shock connected to current Middle East developments. This comes amid disruptions affecting global energy flows, particularly through key maritime routes that supply oil and liquefied natural gas to the continent. Discussions on geopolitics forums and in European capitals highlight concerns about sustained impacts on energy supplies at a time when Europe has already been working to reduce its dependence on Russian energy. Perspectives emphasize varying levels of preparedness. Some view this as a necessary call to accelerate diversification away from vulnerable supply routes and to invest more aggressively in renewable sources and alternative suppliers. Others argue that Europe remains structurally dependent on energy pathways that are now at heightened risk, and that the transition away from fossil fuels cannot happen quickly enough to cushion the current shock. The warning is being compared to previous energy crises, though the current trigger, conflict centered on the Persian Gulf rather than a land war in Europe, presents a different set of challenges. The question worth considering: how dependent is Europe on energy routes affected by this conflict, and what preparations are being discussed in Brussels and national capitals to mitigate the risk? In a related diplomatic story that has received less attention, Pakistan is holding new peace talks with Afghanistan and China. Pakistan has confirmed it is engaged in a fresh round of discussions with Afghanistan's Taliban government. The talks are taking place in Beijing, with China attempting to broker a lasting ceasefire after recent border clashes and accusations of cross-border militancy. NPR reports that Pakistan confirmed the talks and highlighted China's mediating role in what has historically been a difficult bilateral relationship. The context is decades of mistrust. Pakistan and Afghanistan share a long, porous border that has been a haven for militant groups. Islamabad has long accused Kabul of allowing anti-Pakistan militants to operate from Afghan soil, while the Taliban government has complained about Pakistani military operations near the border. China's involvement reflects Beijing's growing interest in stabilizing the region to protect its own investments and to prevent extremism from spreading into its western provinces. Perspectives see both opportunity and challenges. Some observers welcome China's involvement as a stabilizing force in a volatile region where Western mediation has often failed. Others question whether external mediation can overcome deep-seated bilateral tensions, historical grievances, and the Taliban's limited ability to control all factions within Afghanistan. The central issues on the table include border security, the flow of militants, and economic cooperation that could benefit all three countries. The question worth considering: how might China's involvement shape outcomes in a region long resistant to outside influence, and what would a successful ceasefire actually look like in practical terms? Now, to really understand much of the coverage you are hearing about the Iran conflict, there is something most reporting leaves out or mentions only in passing. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Roughly 1/5 of global oil consumption passes through a narrow shipping lane at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. The strait is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Shipping is confined to 2-mile-wide channels for traffic in each direction. Tankers from major producers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, The United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Iran itself must pass through this single vulnerable corridor. There are no practical short-term alternatives. Pipelines can only carry a fraction of the volume. Rerouting around Africa would add thousands of miles and weeks of transit time. This creates a structural vulnerability, where even the threat of disruption can spike global oil prices before a single tanker is affected. When you hear warnings about shipping protection or defensive force in the Strait of Hormuz, you can better evaluate whether proposals address the fundamental geography or simply escalate tensions around an inherently fragile system. The mechanism has remained remarkably consistent for decades. Next time you see a headline about strikes near Iran or warnings about energy shocks, ask yourself what percentage of global oil moves through this specific waterway. Ask what the realistic alternatives for oil transport are. Ask who benefits from heightened tensions versus stable passage. Understanding the physical geography behind the headlines helps separate tactical military reporting from the deeper structural risks that affect economies worldwide. Before we go, tomorrow watch for further developments on the personnel changes within the United States administration and any new signals from NATO allies in response to ongoing criticism. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, share it with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.
Without taking the dive, we went on vacation. We had a nice time. My doomsday